Well, good evening and welcome to the groundwater allocation meeting. People are really spread out. You're welcome to cozy on up a little bit closer or stay where you are if you're comfortable there. I'm Jamie Damon and I'll be facilitating our meeting tonight. Our meeting goes until 8 o'clock and I'll walk through the agenda here in just a moment. I want to welcome all of our virtual participants. We have about 22 people online for our meeting today, and it looks like we've got maybe 12 or so in the room for our virtual participants. So let me walk through just a couple of orientation slides. For those of you online, you can mute yourself when you're not speaking, use your raise hand button or press *9 on your phone to get in the queue during the Q&A time. We are leaving the chat open for those of you online. We ask that you only use it to ask a question if you can't raise your hand or if you need technical assistance. Please refrain from having side conversations in the chat or putting substantive information in the chat unless you can't raise your hand and ask a question in a different way. And use your webcam as much as you're comfortable when it's time for the Q&A. Go to the next slide. So our agenda tonight, like I said, we have a presentation starting here in just a few minutes. The presentation will go for till about 6:45, and then we'll open it up for questions and answers, as well as any input that you have. With the folks online and the folks in the room, I'll go back and forth. I'll do a few folks in the room and then a few folks online, and we'll try to get to everybody as best we can in the time that we have. I'll ask that you hold your questions until 6:45 so that Justin can get through the whole presentation. Often the case is if you have a question in the middle of the presentation, a slide 2 or 3 down will most likely answer it. If you haven't already, I encourage you to grab a survey, which is on the back table. They look like this. And you can keep notes to yourself for questions on the survey. And that way, when it's time for the Q&A, you've got them handy. And for folks online in the chat, you can go to the link and then you can go right to the online survey. The other piece of information we have in the room is a timeline. And for folks online, again, the link will take you to the timeline. And the timeline just shows the progression of the conversation about groundwater allocation, as well as a little cheat sheet on the back of all of the presentations and staff reports so that you can go right to the place that's most interesting to you. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. A few guidelines. The agenda is pretty straightforward. It's a 45-minute presentation, and then it's open floor for everybody online and all of you. So we ask that you try to stick to the agenda, participate actively and respectfully. You'll often hear things that maybe you don't agree with. We're here to hear everybody's opinions. So we ask that you are respectful in your comments and in your listening. Be mindful of your speaking time. It's a small group here today, online and in the room. I don't think we'll have any trouble hearing from everybody who wants to participate. Last night we had about 100 people. We had 60 online and 40 in the room. And in Salem we had about 75. And so we didn't quite get to everybody, but I'm sure we'll get to everyone today. Let's see what else here. Respect differences of opinions. Already talked about that. Stay on mute when you're not speaking. That's for folks online, but also for folks in the room. Please avoid side conversations and provide your input on the online survey, either here tonight or online. You can take it away. You can work on the laptops in the back, or you can fill it out. So I'm going to turn it over to Ivan, and he's going to introduce his staff and make some opening remarks. And Ivan, this mic is hot.
Good evening, everybody. Appreciate you taking the time to come out. To get us started, I wanted to do some quick introductions of our staff, both from the East region and the North Central region, and then from Salem. My name's Ivan Gall. I've been the division administrator for our field services division. I actually worked out of Baker City for 4 years, between 2007 and 2011. And am starting October 1st will be the acting deputy director for water management side of our agency. Getting started with introductions. In the back of the room, Marcy Osborne, she's our water master for Baker County. Annette Liba is the division administrator for our technical services division. Let's see, Chris Coitz, region manager here for the North Central region out of Pendleton. And Chris, I'll let you introduce your staff real quick. Sure, come on up. Yeah.
If you come up, it's easier for folks on.
Yeah, thanks for having us. So I want to introduce 3 people from the North Central Region office. Greg Silbernagel is the District 5 Water Master, covering the Umatilla Basin. Luke Martin's the District 23 Water Master, covering the Walla Walla Basin. And Sean Finn is our well inspector, covering the North Central Region, dealing with well construction issues. So tag any of those guys if you have questions for us that we can help answer from our region. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. And then at the front table is our acting director, Doug Woodcock out of Salem. And Justin Iverson is the manager of our groundwater section out of Salem there as well. Tonight, what we're here to do is to try and seek your feedback. And we can do that via a variety of options. We've got paper forms and online forms. We'll be taking a lot of questions at the end of Justin's presentation, and we'll be recording answers there to those questions as well as any feedback that you have. But we're looking at getting ideas and feedback on modernization of our groundwater allocation process and policy. What we're after is trying to protect senior water right users, both surface water and groundwater users, and manage our aquifers in a sustainable fashion. The groundwater allocation process is only used for new water right applications. It's not about exempt uses. And so, let's see. What I wanted to touch on here is try and keep us focused on what we are going to be talking about and what this process doesn't do. So what the process does do is focus on updating our assessment of groundwater availability for new groundwater rights. That's really important in the allocation process. We're going to do that in a fashion that's protective of senior users, again, both senior users on surface water systems and on groundwater systems, and in a fashion that's going to be sustainable for the aquifer resources out there. What this allocation process is not going to do is affect exempt groundwater use or exempt use wells. And I'll talk about those here in a little bit more detail on the next slide. This process doesn't affect any regulation of existing water rights, either surface water or groundwater. And this process does not affect any of the water right transfer processes. And a transfer is where you're making some change to an existing water right. So I touched on exempt uses. What are those? Exempt uses are set aside in statute. There are uses of groundwater for which you don't need a permit. There's a number of them that are listed. I'm going to touch on the top 4 here that are commonly used. You get 15,000 gallons per day for either single or group domestic use. For industrial or commercial uses, you can have up to 5,000 gallons per day. Stock water is an exempt use from a groundwater source. And then outside irrigation of up to 1/2 acre of lawn or non-commercial garden is another exempt use that you can get from groundwater. There are 3 other exemptions, but they're seldom used, so I won't spend any time talking about those. Wanted to kind of set the stage for where we've been, where are we with this process, and where are we going with it. Here's a quick timeline to help with that. Our staff have been working and presenting information to the Water Resources Commission for about the last year. Last winter, there were some initial groundwater allocation discussions with the Water Resources Commission. During the spring, a team of our staff started to generate concepts for a new groundwater allocation policy. Some of those discussions occurred with the commission there as well. And in the summer here in 2022, we got some direction from the commission to go around the state and gather additional public input and feedback on this process. So that's really what we're here to do tonight, is listen to your thoughts, answer questions, gather any feedback or input you have at this time. We're also going to start after these engagement and outreach meetings. We'll take that information that we've heard and convene an internal team to start drafting some new rules. Sometime this winter, it's our intention to convene a rule advisory committee to help us go through those draft rules, start commenting on those. And we're ambitiously hoping to take the draft rules to the commission for adoption late spring of 2023. So with that, I want to go ahead and turn it over to Justin Iverson. He's got a presentation that'll last about 35-40 minutes. He's going to touch on 3 major things, kind of a quick intro to groundwater hydrology. He'll talk about our current allocation process and some of the details of what we've been doing for a number of years. And then he'll talk about some ideas that we have to modernize that process and move forward. So with that, Justin, turn it over to you.
Yeah. And while Justin's making his way up, just a reminder to hold your questions until the end of the presentation, and we'll have plenty of time to get to everybody's questions.
Right. Well, welcome or thank you, I should say, for coming out, and welcome. Again, I'm Justin Iverson. I manage the groundwater section at the Water Resources Department. And as Ivan mentioned, I want to provide some background to help set us up to have a real basic common understanding of what groundwater is and what the issues are with that we've identified with our current allocation process, so that we can collect your input, answer your questions that are related again to this project, in which we're looking again at updating our allocation process, and specifically a technical assessment of, is water available? I want to acknowledge that we're building on several years worth of past presentations to our commission and elsewhere. I'm going to try and summarize at least 6 major meetings worth of information into half an hour. That sheet that Jamie held up, that we're calling the timeline sheet, that you see kind of shown here, that you should have in front of you, or you could pick up on the front table, or that there's a link for the online folks, that has links to staff reports and longer presentations between half an hour and an hour and a half on each of these topics. I'll try and cross-reference those, so if you want more information, you can go grab it there on your own time. And I want to acknowledge that what I'm going to do tonight is necessarily really high level, really general. I'm going to speak to the majority of instances. There are always unique situations. There's always site-specific situations, but what I'll be presenting here is the overall default situation. All right. With that, again, I'm going to break this up into 2 sections. I'm going to talk about key groundwater concepts first, and then talk about our existing allocation process, some of the issues that we've identified, and some proposed solutions. So first section here, I think I skipped 2 there. Our key groundwater concepts. going to talk from the very basic, what is groundwater, make sure that we all understand what we're talking about, talk about groundwater as part of the hydrologic cycle, and then really hit on the source of groundwater to wells, how we typically access groundwater. So first of all, I want to make sure that we're all talking about the same thing. Groundwater is water that is held in pore space or fractures in the rock underneath our feet. So we're not talking about underground rivers or lakes. This is water that's held in pore space that we, again, dominantly access through wells. That water is, again, part of the hydrologic cycle. So groundwater isn't just sitting down there waiting to be mined like another type of mineral, but it is actively recharged through infiltration of precipitation or snowmelt. It flows through the ground from its source of recharge, and it's going someplace, it's discharging someplace. So on long time scales, the amount of water going into the system is roughly on balance with the amount of water going out, right? So it's just part of the cycle, and what comes into the ground is going somewhere and coming out. And the place that it often comes out in Oregon is into streams. So this is a simplified block diagram to really show the very basics of this recharge area over the land surface, precipitation, snowmelt, other ways in which moisture gets into the ground, percolates down to the water table, joins the groundwater system, and flows, in this case, to a stream. Where it comes out at a stream, that's termed base flow, and that creates some proportion of surface water flow at all times. That can be additive to kind of stormwater runoff or direct runoff, but it's always there. And over periods of time when there's not a lot of rainfall, it becomes a more and more dominant part of the overall flow in the stream. So this is a picture of Eagle Creek. I'm not going to mention what county this particular Eagle Creek is in because it's my secret spot, but this is late August, early September. If it's real hot at my place, this is where I like to go to escape the heat. And there's always water in this stream, even though it hasn't rained in 2-3 months, and there's no snowpack above it. There's no dam above it. It's constantly flowing, and that flow is groundwater. And folks have relied on that groundwater coming to the surface in springs and streams for time immemorial. In the case of native populations that were here before settlement and some of the earliest settlers, they depended upon that August stream flow for diverting it to crop growth and just homesteading. That is essentially groundwater that's depended upon by some of the first users in our Western water law prior appropriation system. So with that, let's take another step and talk about groundwater from wells. So, you know, early on, folks could hand dig wells into shallow water tables in the 40s, 50s as technology took off, well drilling technology and electrification, proliferation of wells drilled. And if you go back to our simplified block diagram, as you put in a well, it screens out all the sediment, allows water to come in. A pump in that well will pull water out, and you'll draw the water level down. And I'm seeing, is there any way that you can start the pointer from your view so that I can control it? Okay, well, I'm gonna have to describe it then. All right. So this dashed line that's labeled the water table in this view, that is the water table, and you see it bending toward the well. Yep. I can control the mouse, okay. And we can see that on Zoom. Okay, perfect. Nope, that'll work. Oh. There it is. Okay. Thanks for bearing with us. Okay, so this letter Q, that's there to indicate flow out of the well, the blue arrow, flow of water going out of the well. The water table bends in to basically that's showing water flowing into the well along with these arrows. And this we term a cone of depression. So at early pumping times, actual water in this pore space in this setup of the diagram is flowing into the well, and we're actually draining pore space. So at early times, when you turn a well on, that water is coming from what we would call dynamic storage, right? That's actual water in the well that you're taking out. But over time, that cone of depression reaches out and you start to capture flow. So that flow that was otherwise going toward the stream in our first diagram without a well is now flowing into the well, right? So that was water that would otherwise have discharged toward a stream. And as pumping continues, that cone of depression is going to keep expanding and dropping. And once that expands and touches a surface water body, then you start to capture water from a stream. So water flows, groundwater flows from high potential to low potential, and potential is potential energy. In groundwater, that's a combination of elevation of the water table and pressure. And so just like electricity flows from high voltage to low voltage, heat from high heat to low heat, groundwater flows from high potential to low potential. It's this lowering of the water table that drives flow. And as the water table and that cone of depression drops below stream level, that's going to start drawing water from the stream. Okay. So again, at early time, we're taking water out of pore space. Over time, we start to capture flow paths of water. Okay. The trickiest slide to explain here. This is a picture, and I should mention all these pictures come from USGS documents. This one is from a document called Stream Flow Depletion by Wells, Understanding and Managing the Effects of Groundwater Pumping on Stream Flow. And what this figure is getting across on the x-axis is pumping time. So from the left-hand side of the diagram where pumping starts, to some later time as pumping continues. This is showing the proportion of water coming into the well from storage. So that's this line. And it starts at 100. So this is percentage of groundwater pumping rate. So this line is the water from storage line. And at early time, 100% of water comes from storage. And over time, the percentage of water from storage from draining pore space decreases. And conversely, starting at 0 and increasing rather rapidly is the amount of water from stream flow depletion. Those lines should always add up to 100. And over time, as pumping continues, less and less water comes from storage, more and more water comes from stream depletion. So the reason that I've got this slide on here is to again emphasize these two sources of water to wells, how they change over time. And we will get into the why of that in our next section. Why I'm focused on that. So for folks that gravitate more toward kind of a narrative, I'm going to say the same thing that graph just said, and then I've been talking about in the last couple slides in a quote here. And this quote comes from one of the early researchers in groundwater, Charles Tice, way back in 1940, understood and pointed out in a paper called The Source of Water Derived from Wells that from the standpoint of groundwater conservation and statutory or other regulation, the following point should be emphasized. All water discharged by wells is balanced by the loss of water somewhere. So as I said on my second slide, groundwater is just part of the hydrologic cycle. That water, since before we ever drilled a well, had been recharging, flowing, discharging to surface water. when we put in a well, we are intercepting the water that was going someplace. Okay. And that connection is important to understand, again, because of our prior appropriation system, because we have the first uses dependent on that base flow. As we develop groundwater over time, we're developing water that was otherwise being used. So hopefully with that background, it's an easy next step to understand that as we've been allocating groundwater over the past 65 years, that has contributed, water right by water right, well by well, to reduction in surface water base flow, as well as groundwater level declines in many parts of the state. And that's occurred at the expense of senior users. So that's our main issue statement right there. Okay, so I'm going to switch to the second part of the talk here. I'm going to talk about some allocation issues and some potential solutions. Again, I want to emphasize these are not all the issues, just some major ones that I want to bring up. And these potential solutions are not all the solutions or the solutions. They're things that as managers of the water resource we've identified, but I'm putting them up there as starters for thought and for input so that folks can see roughly kind of the types of things that we're looking at and looking for from your input. So going to talk again about some issues, and I'm going to kind of smash together identifying issues and identifying these initial ideas, and I'll keep them together so the issue and the idea go side by side. And I'm going to talk about two major items here. So first of all, I want to acknowledge that our current rules and policies combine such that we avoid short-term and acute impacts to surface water. So when we review an application for a new groundwater right, we take a look at that right in context and the immediate surrounding area. And if there are going to be impacts to stream flow, then we'll flag those and perhaps, say, nope, you're going to have potential for substantial interference. I'm sorry, we can't issue this right. But we currently do not holistically take into account cumulative impacts or long-term impacts over time. So that is an issue that affects this long-term source of water to wells from stream flow capture. Second point is, right now in our existing allocation process, data must exist to indicate over appropriation. And if data do not exist in the vicinity of a new application, then our existing practice, our past practice has been to say, okay, we don't have specific information here. Therefore, we will assume that it's not over appropriated. We will issue a water right, and we will condition that to require the developer of the water right to collect data, provide that to the department, and then we build our understanding for the next application that comes in the area. So those, among other nuances of the review process, mean that as we look back at the applications that we've received over the past decade, that we understand that more than 70% of groundwater applications result in a permit. And further, in areas that we've identified back in about this time last year, about June, July 2021, these areas that we've identified as concerning for groundwater, in those areas, approximately 80% of applications receive permits. I've just realized that I started out saying I was going to cross-reference to this sheet, and I haven't done that. So I'm gonna take a break and pause here real quick. I'm going to say that this map that we're looking at, this is our groundwater concern ratings map. This is underlain by a lot of data analysis that is all explained in detail in the staff report for the June 2021 commission meeting. again, links to that on the timeline page. And also going way back to the beginning of how groundwater works. I gave a pretty extensive discussion of that back in 2016 and rehashed that in a recent video. So that is the 2016 item on the timeline there. All right. So I'm going to talk about two concepts here out of three. These both focus on surface water availability. Again, these focus on that long-term source of water to wells, stream flow capture. Have our block diagram up here again to remind us of really basically in general how that looks. And want to point out that our definition of overappropriation in our rules talks about overappropriation of groundwater occurring when groundwater development results in further depletion of already overappropriated surface water. So as we talked about, further depletion likely happens in all instances through a series of rules and policies over time. Historically, we've really constrained that and said, well, what we're really concerned about is the potential for substantial interference. And so when we assess the impacts of a new well, we are typically looking at impacts from wells that exist within a mile of a stream or closer. So if a well is more than a mile from a stream, we're not looking at these impacts. And we are looking generally at acute, immediate impacts, not long-term impacts. So this is an example that I pulled up. It's from an unrelated application, but this is in an area in the Deschutes Basin where we have done a lot of study. We have a computer model where we can simulate the impacts of pumping on stream flow. And you can see this is very similar to the theoretical graph from the USGS I put up earlier, where now instead of a kind of a time period that's undefined, this time period is defined. It's defined in months. A little not intuitive perhaps to look at 50-month blocks, but roughly this is a 30-year period. Okay, so 30 years on the x-axis, and the y-axis is stream depletion, the stream depletion portion of the source of water to wells. So it doesn't have the concurrent depletion from storage, but this is roughly the curve that arcs up that shows increase in the proportion of water that's pumped coming from stream depletion. And you can see that that builds over time. And we are typically looking at, in our review process now, impacts after 30 days of pumping or 1 year of pumping. Those are relatively pretty small, but over time, those impacts build and build until, in this case, for this particular situation, after 30 years, roughly 85–90% of stream flow is coming from, or excuse me, well flow is coming from stream depletion. So again, of the however many CFS are coming out of this well, if it's 1 CFS, then 0.85-ish of that CFS is coming from water that would otherwise have been discharging to a stream at that point in time. So we're not taking into account, again, with our current situation, these long-term impacts. And these impacts are additive such that the next well and the next well in the area, their stream depletions just start adding on to each other, right? So any one particular well, probably not significant, right? Probably not measurable in most cases, but 10 wells, 100 wells, 1,000 wells, pretty soon those start to add up over time. So one of the concepts that we've thought about for going forward is to not, again, limit ourselves to the instance of just that application, just those wells, but to look at watersheds or sub-watersheds and say, hey, is this new application for a groundwater right going to develop groundwater that is hydraulically connected to a surface water body? And if so, let's take a look at whether that surface water body is fully allocated, over appropriated or not. So what we're looking at here, the big map is a map of August available stream flow from our surface water availability reporting system, showing that in all these areas that are tan in the month of August, there's no water available for further appropriation. So one of these concepts is to say, okay, if we already know that there's no more surface water available and a new groundwater right is going to further impact available surface water in August, should we be issuing that? Is water available? Okay. Similarly, because our water availability reporting system we've got a number of gauged watersheds, but adjacent watersheds are estimated based on those that we've gauged. Not perfect. We've got areas that are white here with no available data. We want to make sure that we take into account our on the ground knowledge. So similarly with this concept too, we want to take into account the surface water regulation history that we have built up from our water master course. So we want to go out to our water masters. We want to understand what streams they're regulating on. And again, if we get an application for a new groundwater right that's hydraulically connected to a stream that our water masters are already regulating, surface water users off on, do we want to issue another groundwater right that's going to further impact that stream, where folks that are already trying to be dependent on that stream aren't getting the water that they have rights to? So with that, I'm going to move over to the other side of the source of water to wells ledger. We're going to talk about storage, this early time source of water. And I say early time, depending on the geologic situation. If the hydraulic connection between the groundwater system and a stream is very long, or the rock types are very tight, then you can pump a lot of storage before you get that cone of depression out to intersect a stream. So in that case, you're taking most of the water out of storage for a longer period of time. And the response that you're going to see in the aquifer is a continued lowering of the water table, right? You're going to continue to draw down pore space or dry out pore space as you pump, and water levels are going to fall over time. So this is a hydrograph showing water levels in these particular wells in the Willamette Valley, just north of the Mount Angel Groundwater Limited area. Water levels starting out up at 100 feet above mean sea level in the mid to late 1990s. And over time, those water levels are being depleted as we develop these wells and pump groundwater. That water's coming out of storage, and we're basically seeing the water level in the bathtub drop down and down. One thing, well, I'm putting this up here to contrast it with my next couple slides, which provide a more nuanced situation. One of our criteria for is water available that's in statute is, the statutory policy is, we shall maintain reasonably stable water levels. And at this point in time, reasonably stable is not defined in our rules. So there's a lot of question about what is reasonably stable. One thing that we have defined is a term excessively declined. So we know it's not reasonably stable, and that excessively declined, probably it's got a series of if-then definitions, but the most concrete one is if the water level has dropped 50 feet from the highest known water level, that's excessively declined. That's a definition and rule. So in this case, we started out at 100 feet elevation, and 20 years later, 25 years later, we're down by 50 feet elevation. We've essentially reached that definition of excessively declined. pretty straightforward. If we got a new application in this area for this aquifer, we'd say, no, water's not available. We've met this definition of excessively declined. We haven't maintained reasonably stable water levels. So that would be a finding that water's not available or it's over appropriated. Now, to contrast that, I'm going to show another set of hydrographs. These are going to come from the Deschutes Basin. The wells we're going to show range from wells that are over near the Cascade Crest, running generally east through Sisters, through Redmond, over into Powell Butte. And I'll point out this Sisters fault zone. This is a demarcation I use in the hydrograph, so just kind of noting its location. And here we have a number of hydrographs that are doing roughly different things. So these are all in the regional aquifer system in the Deschutes Basin. The wells that are shown here going up and down, these are again closer to the Cascade Crest. And this is a little bit different than the last plot in that I've taken these wells from a very large area and I've normalized their starting water levels in 1995 to 0. And then this hydrograph is showing a change in water level over time from 1995 to about present. So these wells over near the crest, they rise 20 feet, they fall 20 feet, they rise 10 feet, they fall a little bit. That's variable with climate and natural climate cycles. And even though they're going up and down by kind of a substantial amount, I would call this reasonably stable because after 25 years, we've ended up still about almost 10 feet higher than where we started, right? So even though it's variable, this is just going with the climate up and down. And it gets kind of grayer from there. So we start with this well that's within the Sisters Fault Zone, a little bit further east, and we see that it starts with a trend that's very similar to its neighbors here. And then something happens and it's not rising and falling anymore. So we'll ask ourselves, is that reasonably stable? We don't know, we don't have a definition, but that creates a gray area. Further east as we go, we have another set of wells. They don't really rise and fall, at least not that much. And then they start to drop off, and they're dropping off at about half a foot a year for a good 15 years. Again, question, is that reasonably stable? Hard to say, maybe, maybe not. And then as we go further east, again, wells in the same aquifer, different area, and water levels don't go up at all. And they just fall and fall and fall, and they start to fall kind of at a faster rate than they have. And the question again arises, is this reasonably stable? So in this situation, historically, we've looked at this and we've said, well, half a foot a year doesn't meet the definition of excessively declined. And, we don't have, again, this definition of reasonably stable. So again, this is a situation, like I said at the beginning, where we would say, well, hard to say, don't know. We will default to issue a permit because it's not that bad, not excessive. And we will require data collection and further assessment. And knowing that we're on the way, so in these wells, especially that are furthest east, where we've dropped 30 feet, and we can probably infer that we're going to continue dropping, the question arises, do we continue to issue because we haven't met this excessively declined, or do we look forward and say, hey, this is probably, in my opinion, no longer meeting the definition of reasonably stable? And so to be clear and consistent with that and allow us to make a positive determination, this third concept is to define what reasonably stable is, so we can make a distinct finding at every stage in the review process. So that is some initial issues. Again, issues with the source of water to wells, issues with early time source drawing down storage, issues with long-term capturing water from stream flow, and some potential solutions to those. And at this point with the rest of the meeting, we'd like to both answer any questions you have about what we've presented and also take your feedback or input on ideas you have for how you believe we should go forward with assessing applications for new groundwater rights. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Justin, for that. So here we are at the input session. A couple of reminders for virtual attendees to get in the queue to ask a question. Just raise your hand or you can press *9 on your phone, and then we'll recognize you and you can unmute yourself and you can ask your question. Use your webcam if you're comfortable, and use the chat if you can't raise your hand or have another issue you want to let us know about. So I was just looking at the chat. We have 26 people online, and I don't see any hands up for our online folks. So we'll start within the room. What questions do you have for Justin, Ivan, or Doug? Go ahead and I will bring you the mic, and you need to introduce yourself. Let us know who you are. And if you're with an organization, let us know what that is. Jackie.
I'm Jackie Couples. I'm with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service here in LeGrand, and I really appreciated your explanation of groundwater. That was very helpful for me, who does not come from an aquatic background, but finds myself dealing with aquatic issues. So my question is, your block diagrams referenced a lot having to do with, the stream flow being affected, but what about springs? And how do you look at that?
All right, so thanks for your question. Springs operate much the same, though they are more of a point source than as a sink for the groundwater system. What a spring generally is that groundwater flow finds that it was on some pathway in the general aquifer, and then either it hits some change in permeability that's lower that forces it out of the ground, or it meets some feature that is higher permeability and it just naturally wants to, pressure gradients being the same, it'll squirt out through higher permeability. It's just less resistance to flow. And so other than the details, again, it's much the same. It's groundwater flow that's being recharged somewhere. It's gone along a flow path. It's met some change in the subsurface permeability field, and that causes the water to daylight to the surface.
So the map where you, I think you showed some tan areas, and I think it was based on streams. Does that also take into account springs, or is that part of what you're factoring in when?
Yeah,
considering?
so another good question. So that map was just available surface water flow that is tied to streams. In our existing review process, we do look around the National Hydrologic Data Set for mapped springs, and especially if there's a spring with an existing water right on it, we will assess impacts to that senior water right. If the spring does not currently have a water right on it right now, we will note that, but that's not, we don't make a finding of that will injure or impact that spring. So that's not a determining factor.
Thank you.
Thanks for that question. Other questions in the room? Are there any online yet? No? I'll go ahead and start here, and then I'll move to the back.
Yeah, Paul Garvin, Garvin Hydrogeo, do water rights consulting out of Baker City. I was looking at that stream depletion groundwater model graph you had there. And I'm not really familiar with the groundwater review process intimately. How much of a role does groundwater modeling play when you're making these reviews? And how does the kind of limitations of data potentially cause differences in those types of reviews?
So we model impacts of groundwater development to existing groundwater users and to surface water bodies in pretty much every review. The models that we use change depending on the information we have and the geologic situation. So the figure that I put up there was from an area in the Deschutes Basin where we've done a multi-year cooperative study with the USGS and come out with a series of publications about how the groundwater system works, and followed that up with a development of a numerical computer model that can simulate groundwater flow in 3 dimensions. So that particular model is used only in the Deschutes Basin to answer particular questions. Much more often we use what's called an analytical model. That's it's basically an equation that is solvable, that takes into account our best understanding of geologic properties and potential relationships that drive groundwater flow, and estimate stream depletion based on those known properties. It's a lot of nuances that I'm glossing over there, but I think that the short answer is we apply some level of modeling in every review process. And the issue, I'll take it a step further and reiterate, the issue is that we model for impacts the way that the rules are set up right now. They ask, will the well create or draw, will the pumping rate of the well be 25% made up of stream flow capture after 30 days? Right? So even in that example that I gave, after 1 year, there was 3% capture of surface water, and the rest of the water was coming from depletion of storage. So we would say no, right? No. And therefore we would not find that's part of the definition of potential for substantial interference. But if we were to ask the same question after 30 years, we would say yes, right? And these water rights are issued in perpetuity as long as they're being used beneficially. Water rights can be multi-generational. They stick with the land, they get passed down with property changes or what have you. So these rights are in existence for very long periods of time. And right now, our current set of rules ask us to look at an irrigation season or less. Like, are the impacts short-term? And if not, then we are issuing water rights that are accumulating impacts further into the future.
Thank you.
Thanks for that. Go ahead and come back here. Go ahead and introduce yourself and let us know if you're with an organization or an agency.
Preston Wynn, and I'm not with an agency. I'm a landowner, farmer in Umatilla County, and we have some senior water rights, and I'm concerned about maintaining those senior water rights, as I think any senior water right or any water right holder would be. I see 3 different items out there. So one is clarifying questions. Secondly is sharing ideas. Are we just on clarifying questions now, or? Okay,
Yeah.
so I want to ask a clarifying question, but I also want to share an idea. So the clarifying question would be watching and listening to your presentation. The feeling that I get, or the understanding that I get, is that we are either approaching the point of having allocated all of the water that is available, or we've gone past that point. So is that an accurate perception?
So I'm going to start with saying, I want to acknowledge that the criteria that we look at for issuing water rights is listed as is water available. And then I'm going to come back to some of the earlier slides and what I've termed the no free lunch criteria, right? Where the hydrologic cycle exists and it's cycling, it's operating, and we are reaching into that cycle and diverting water for various beneficial uses, right? If we want to grow a crop, we have to take water out of the stream, and we've come up with some criteria by which we've kind of divvied up that water, and we've set definitions of is water available. And in the surface water realm, where we can see it and measure it and it's visible on a daily basis, that's much better defined than for groundwater. And in our accounting system, that map that I put up that was mostly tan, that shows that at least in the month of August, the majority of the watersheds are fully allocated. And we can ask our water masters around here, right? To various degrees, they're regulating back junior users because senior users aren't getting their full water right. And so that's over allocated. And so I think the question then that you're asking is, with groundwater, have we gone beyond or not? Well, I should acknowledge, I mean, groundwater it's an amazing resource. And whenever I hear the term that gets tossed around, this green infrastructure term, right? Like the services that the earth provides that help us develop crops or municipal water distribution systems, or even a homestead with a homestead supply well. That's an amazing resource to have, and we've used that. But our current set of criteria don't fully recognize the impacts of that development on these surface water bodies, where again, we're obviously over appropriated. And so when you ask, are we beyond that? I don't know exactly how to answer that, other than, like, right now, the way that the rules are issued or are set up, we're saying, no, it's not fully allocated. We're continuing to issue. And I think that what we're contemplating here with this relook at the rules is, should we be changing that, right? And redefining what that is.
And I'll go a little bit further to answer that. Clearly, in some basins, yes, we've over appropriated groundwater. The first critical groundwater area was Little Cow Valley, 1950.
58, yeah.
Yeah, late 50s. We shut that small basin down. The Umatilla Basin's got a number of critical groundwater areas in the basalt aquifer systems. We've classified groundwater in the Harney Basin for exempt uses only, so we're not issuing any more permits in that area. Same for the Walla Walla Basin. So there's clearly examples around the state where we have over appropriated groundwater itself, and you see those water level declines in a consistent fashion. At a statewide level, it's really going to be a basin by basin specific question. But certainly the answer would be, we will over appropriate all the basins if we continue to issue groundwater rights in them at some point in time. So.
Well, living in the Walla Walla Basin, I'm
Yep.
very well aware of that. And I used to own property down in Morrow County prior to it being a critical groundwater area. And then when it was declared a critical groundwater area, the land was worth less money, obviously. At any rate, so sharing ideas for criteria regarding how to protect existing water right holders. It seems to me, and this is a simplistic answer, but it seems to me that not issuing new water rights would have a better effect on protecting the senior water rights than continuing to issue 70 or 80% of the water right applicants that the slide showed. So that's a harsh statement, but it seems logical to me that if you have a limited resource and you have to meet the needs of the senior water rights owners, issuing new permits will only exacerbate the problem. So it appears to me that limiting or eliminating the issuance of new water right permits would be an appropriate action.
Thank you for that, Preston.
Yeah, thanks
Uh,
for that. We
if I
do
may-
have, oh,
If-
go ahead.
If I
Doug.
may, Jamie, not to be outdone by these two, I'd like to weigh in on Preston's question there earlier. So some points that Justin made that I think are really important to bear in mind, and that is when you develop groundwater, that water comes from somewhere. It's either coming out of storage, or it is coming out of surface water, or it's a combination of the two. Our current permitting system is kind of like this. We do it application by application. And to your question, are we over appropriated? When we're looking at a very narrow range of items to get after that, we don't always hit the mark, I think. And so, as Justin pointed out, our current practice is good at preventing those acute short-term impacts from happening. But we continue to issue when the impacts are going to be very small over a very long period of time. But over decades of doing that, that begins to compound, begins to accumulate. And now we're seeing groundwater declines across the state. We've got surface water issues across the state. And so we are modernizing our groundwater allocation process. What we're looking at doing kind of conceptually here, what Justin has presented in these concepts of looking at water availability in a basin, for instance, looking at those stable groundwater levels, looking at surface water regulation history. How far back does the water master regulate each year on this particular drainage? Is it 1860? Is it 1900? It's going to be a lot older than any permit that we issue today. That's for sure. So the priority system to weigh those two, we know the surface water, the senior surface water holder is going to carry the day there. But by putting all of these things together, we kind of take a step back and we're looking a bit more holistically across the basin to get at that question. Are we over appropriated? Is water available? So that's what this is all about. And this is where we're really looking for your insights. What else should we be considering here? Or do you see something here that alarms you that we shouldn't be considering? We'd very much like your input on this as we go into our Rules Advisory Committee and drafting draft rules for our commission.
Thanks for that, Doug. So we do have a hand up for our online. So Robin Cook, you go ahead. You can unmute yourself. You can put yourself on video and we can see you in the room. And just let us know who you're with or how you use water.
Hi, thanks. Thanks for pulling all of this together. I appreciate it. I'm Robin Cook. I'm with GSI Water Solutions out of Portland, Oregon. And I work with Baker City and some of the folks on the east side as well too. Because my question sort of follows up a little bit on what we were just talking about and wondering if the department would consider some more time limited permits like they do in areas where their groundwater limitations are already well documented. If that would be maybe a consideration for places where there isn't enough data to determine whether or not water is available, and then just have regular check-ins with the water level monitoring program.
So Robin, I think what you're asking is, could the department consider time limited permits? Yeah.
Right. You know, they do it in the Salem area. I believe there's 5-year permits that you have to reapply for and show that you're using the water wisely and using, I think there's efficient irrigation needs as part of that as well. So they're not using a ton of water, but they're also being asked to check in every 5 years.
Yeah, we got it. Great. Thanks for that. Ivan, Justin, Doug, anything to share on that?
I can start on that, Robin. Thank you. It's a good question. And it's been raised once or twice before. So we have issued a number, I'm sorry, I don't have the number with me, of time limited permits. I think 5-year limitations on them in and around portions of the Salem Willamette Valley area there. A lot of those were, I think, initially issued to try and establish some crops. I think folks have come back asking for additional extensions on those, certainly as the climate has warmed and dried. Just establishing the crop, it's harder to keep it going. So the idea does hold merit, but it really is going to be a situation of, I think, business decisions for the landowners. Are they willing to make that investment to get the infrastructure in place and plant the crop with some level of uncertainty of the longevity of a water right that may not get renewed after the initial 5 years if data collected during that period of time, say, show groundwater level declines, or we identify, say, interference with other nearby wells or surface water. Justin or Doug, anything there?
Okay, thanks for that, Ivan. So folks online, if you want to ask a question or offer an idea, go ahead and raise your hand and we'll recognize you, or you can put it in the chat and we can ask it for you. So other questions of folks in the room or ideas that you want to share? Yeah, go ahead. Well, if you remind us who you are and an organization.
Yeah, I'm Tim Bailey. I'm with the Powder Basin Watershed Council. I guess I have a question about, the using surface water availability as a means of regulating groundwater. I worked for Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife for 30-some years. And in my experience, using the water availability tables, they're monthly. And so if you were going to use that methodology for regulating or deciding on groundwater use, I presume that you would look at that monthly, potentially. If the proposed use was a summertime use and there was not water available in the summertime, then you wouldn't grant the use. But oftentimes there's water, with surface water that's available in the wintertime, according to the tables. So the decision would be based upon then the proposed use period. Is that correct? Is that how that would work?
It's a good question, Tim. And I'll maybe kind of rephrase it for the group. So our surface water availability model is broken down into the 12 calendar months. And depending on the stream, there's numbers at, say, an 80% exceedance level. So 8 out of 10 years, you would expect this much water to be available for this stream in March or June or August. And the TAN map that Justin showed in his presentation for the month of August showed that much of the state doesn't have water available. No surprise in the summer months. And there's certainly exceptions to that in the main stem Willamette and some of the coastal basins. The key component, though, with groundwater pumping is that it takes time, as Justin showed, for that stream depletion to build up. And once the well shuts off, it takes a similar amount of time for that stream depletion to go back to zero or something close to zero. And so that's one of the questions that we have, and we're looking for input on what level on a particular stream should water be available for us to make a finding that surface water is available for impacts, knowing that there's going to be delays. So, well, I won't go into if water were available January through April, and we said you can pump your well January through April, that's 4 months of pumping. There would be 4 months of continued or delayed impact to the stream at least after that, during months when water was not available. So we're looking for feedback from folks to get some sense of what they think would make good sense when we use, or if we use, that surface water availability as a criteria for new allocation. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
And I guess, Tim, can I interpret that as saying that you would have concerns if we would issue, like, because of this delayed impact, it sounds like what you're saying is, hey, I'd have concerns if you were issuing on a month by month time step because pumping in January doesn't necessarily affect the stream just in January, right?
Thanks for that. Any other questions or ideas in the room?
This is Jackie Couples again with Fish and Wildlife Service. I this is a follow-up question to the spring response you gave earlier, and I think you said that you would consider impacts to springs if it has a water right. How do you consider impacts, and maybe this isn't part of the process and this might be a recommendation, but to springs used by wildlife? Because certainly in arid part of Oregon, that's a critical source of water for wildlife. So is there a strategy for being inclusive of those impacts beyond just the human consumption?
I appreciate that question because today there is no process within our current allocation that gets at that. Springs are often watering holes for wildlife, and the current rules and statutes make no provision for that. And if that is a recommendation that the department should be considering, then let's put that on the table. There just is, trying to think of a mechanism here whereby current rule and statute would get at that. Justin's question, or the question that Justin answered earlier about we would not consider impacts to a spring if there were no water right on it. Now, if that spring is the headwater to a drainage that has water availability to it, that's all part of a single system that we would consider. But if it's a spring on a topographic map, just has a little squiggly line and is not connected to the remainder of a drainage, then it just is not part of the groundwater allocation review process.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, come back over here. Any hands raised online? You just got one. Preston, I'll hand it to you.
Again, Preston Wynn. I'm not certain exactly how this would be able to be implemented. I do know where it fits in. In the Columbia Basin, when I started teaching 40 years ago, there was center pivot irrigation at roughly 900 gallons per minute per center pivot. Now we see those center pivots using half that much water. Watermelons in Hermiston were raised with flood irrigation largely back at that time frame. And now I don't know of any that are not raised under drip irrigation, utilizing far less water and increasing yields. When you deal with a limited resource, if you can accomplish the same goals utilizing less of that resource, it allows that resource to be spread out over a greater number of users. So from an agricultural standpoint, at least, being able to figure out how possibly we can incentivize agricultural users to utilize less water and possibly allow their neighbor to use some of that water. But what that takes probably is money. But Aggies are pretty smart people. And, maybe we can figure that out. But I just think, I just know that if we can utilize, if each user can utilize less and still reach their goal, there's more of that resource for other people.
Thanks. We do have Danielle online. Danielle, if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself, you can put yourself on video if you like, and we can see you in the room. And let us know who you're with, if you're with an organization or how you use water.
Hi, Danielle Reynolds. I'm with the Harney Soil and Water Conservation District in Hines, Oregon. And I'm curious. So I'm in Harney Basin, and we've received, over allocation in our basin. And I'm curious what that means for landowners who may be more junior water rights holders. Is there any chance that new water rights holders are going to be denied the use of their permit?
Thanks for that question, Danielle. And just to be clear, did you say you're with the Hines Irrigation District? Yeah, Harney Soil and Water Conservation District. Thanks.
Yes.
Okay. So thanks for your question, Danielle. So I just want to take that in two parts. The first part is to say that right now we're talking about rule changes in how we issue new water rights. And you're correct, for the Harney Basin, we have already identified that area is over appropriated, and we've gone through a previous rule process that has, basically Harney Basin is a bit ahead of the game from this particular process we're talking about tonight. So what we're talking about tonight isn't going to directly affect the Harney Basin. Regarding our next steps in the Harney Basin, where we have identified, especially in some localized areas, some real obvious over appropriation from the fact that this definition of excessive declines has been met. We are planning to be out in Burns on November 3rd for a big public meeting. And that is when we will be talking about next steps and taking input on that particular thing. So I'd encourage you to mark your calendar. We'll be at the community center there in Burns, and there'll be more information coming on that particular meeting. So be happy to, we'll talk a lot more about that. We'll have presentations ahead of time and do a similar format to this, but it'll all be focused on that particular question.
Thanks for that, Justin. Other comments in the room? Yeah, go ahead and introduce yourself and let us know who you're with.
Hi, Lauren Navarrete with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in La Grande. And I was curious how drought and climate change play into your decision-making processes.
Thank you for that question, because it's a real world today question. Many basins across the state are experiencing these persistent repeated droughts, and our current process that we utilize isn't really flexible in that regard to be able to, well, a couple of things here. Let me finish where I was. Our current process does not take into account, is it raining today? We're really looking at our water availability, to some degree, our water availability, proximity to a stream. We do our modeling, and we look at some water level data, and is there an impact within a year? If we're in a drought or not, it really doesn't come into play. Regarding climate change, we're really paying attention to the data that we have before us and what we've been experiencing recently. But again, we don't have those projections to help us know what's it going to be like in 25 years. You know, we have trends from the last few years that we're working with, but we have certain basins in the state where we have already stopped allocating any new groundwater because of the current conditions that we've recognized. And interestingly enough, when there are droughts, the tools we have available to us are to allow for more water to be utilized through the issuance of essentially temporary drought permits. And that's to get people by who perhaps have a reliance on surface water, and that surface water is not available. So they get a temporary drought permit to get them through to the end of the irrigation season. So it's not a, we are in a drought, we're not issuing any permits. It's we are in a drought and we have some tools that allow some flexibility for some additional or alternate uses that are going on. So that is our current process today, if that gets to your question. Okay.
Yeah, and I'll jump in there real quick. We heard at our public meeting last night that we should be considering climate change, and our agency should be taking a closer look at some of the model predictions that go out many decades, that are forward looking and are predicting, warmer conditions, higher evapotranspiration rates from the landscape, and more or less precipitation depending on where you're at. And so again, you folks are coming up with some great questions. Spin those around a little bit. And if you want to make some recommendations to the agency for our consideration, that would be really helpful for us.
Yeah, and be sure to use I see Jackie's got lots of notes on hers. Be sure to use the written form to, put your notes, and you can leave that with us tonight. You can take that away with you. You can get it back to us by October 19th, and you can use the online form as well. So we really, really do want to hear your ideas. Other folks online? Nobody? Well, we don't have to stay till 8. And keep talking, but we are glad to stay if you have things to share and questions to ask.
I'm Dave Wildman with Anderson Perry and Associates, a local engineering firm. And so we represent a lot of municipalities in our region. And we also deal a lot with deep basalt aquifers. And it seems like a lot of the discussion has been focused more on kind of the shallow alluvial aquifers, recharging local streams and things. I'm curious to know if there's anything besides groundwater levels that are being monitored in that process to figure out some of the impacts we might be having on some of these confined deep basalt aquifers.
Sure. That last part of my discussion on reasonably stable water levels, as you just brought up, the examples I was showing, many of them were from, especially the Mount Angel ones, those were basalt aquifers. So especially where they're deeper, and they might have longer flow paths to streams, or those flow paths have maybe been truncated by faulting or other kind of geologic structures. Essentially what that does is just shifts the amount of time that it takes to transition from storage depletion to capture depletion. And so on our planning horizon, what that means is the source of water to wells is largely storage, right? And if it's confined, you aren't necessarily draining pore space, you're just depressurizing that system. And really, water levels are our best direct measure of use of storage over time. So I can't think of any other parameters we would use to monitor the water balance in those aquifers. Does that answer your question? I
guess on that train of thought too, we do have several communities off the top of my head, City of Pendleton, Baker City, in the general Echo area, a lot of aquifer storage and recovery projects.
Yeah.
And maybe not a lot, a few, but that seems like something that the previous discussion was mentioned, incentivizing some of those programs and trying to help develop those. And it seems like there's perhaps some regulatory processes that could be streamlined a little bit to help that move forward more and help us to be able to recharge some of those aquifers too.
Yeah, that's a real good comment. Thank you. couple parts to a response to that. First of all, the aquifer storage and recovery or artificial recharge programs, I believe could exist, like they wouldn't necessarily be affected by this process. And generally, just as a summary for folks that might not be as familiar, that is a technology and a permitting pathway that allows for the capture of water in generally the winter season where there's excess water available. So instead of showing the plot of what's surface water availability at August, we would look at November, December, January, right? And if there's excess water, to take that, treat it to a particular standard such that we're confident that we can inject that or infiltrate that into the ground, and then pull that water back up during August when there's limited availability and increased demand generally, and use that to help with peak demands. So that permitting pathway would remain open regardless of what we're talking about here tonight, I believe. And we've received similar comments. There is interest in this, and we're looking at how we can make sure that we're making those projects, the permitting for those projects, as efficient as possible. And maybe I'll chat with you afterwards if you've got a particular input on the ASR program, since that's not specifically what we're talking about here, but I would like to hear your thoughts on that. So.
Okay, thanks for that, Justin. We have no other questions online. And I'm not seeing any other hands in the room. What do you think, Ivan? Should we wrap it up?
I think so.
Okay. So we were just going to talk about next steps. I think you can go ahead and advance the slides to that. There you are.
Yeah, so let's see, we started out last week. We held one of these listening sessions in Salem. We were in Bend last night, LeGrand tonight. We'll be down in Medford next week on Wednesday evening. And then our final kind of public outreach meeting will be a virtual one on Monday, October 10th in the afternoon there. So you've got a couple more opportunities to join either in person or virtually. I certainly encourage folks to do so. Always the opportunity to use the online form to submit some forms until the end of the day on October 19th there. If you have questions that didn't get answered tonight, please reach out to myself or Justin. Happy to get answers. If we don't have them, we'll get to the appropriate staff to do that. And I think with that, if there's no further questions, I want to thank everybody for making the effort that showed up in person and also for sitting at home and joining online. Good questions this evening, and appreciate all your time. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you and good night.
Thank you.